The organization built to protect the supreme leader now wants the supreme leader gone. That is where this story begins. Not with the crowds, not with the blackouts, not with the shortages, not even with the missing appearances with that. Because once the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps starts privately circulating the demand that Mojtaba Khamenei should resign, the crisis inside Iran is no longer just a protest crisis or an economic crisis. It becomes a regime crisis at the level that matters most. The men with the guns no longer fully believe in the man at the top. And the real story is not that Iran is angry. The real story is that the Islamic Republic may have broken its own most important promise to itself. And once that promise breaks, every other pillar starts to wobble at the same time. For 47 years, this regime did not survive by making life good. It survived by making suffering meaningful. That was the compact we endure, but we do not bow. We are sanctioned, isolated, threatened, but we do not surrender. Resistance is not just policy. Resistance is identity. Resistance is why this state deserves obedience. That was the story. And this source text is really about one thing. That story may now be collapsing. The mistake outsiders make with Iran again and again is that they look first at economics. The inflation is terrible, therefore the regime is in trouble. The blackouts are severe, therefore the regime is in trouble. The medicine shortages are brutal, therefore the regime is in trouble. All of that is true, but it is not the deepest layer. The deepest layer is that those hardships were politically survivable for decades because they were wrapped in a narrative. The regime kept telling its base that pain was not pointless. Pain had strategic meaning. Pain was the cost of refusing humiliation. Pain was proof that Iran still stood upright while other states bent. Once that meaning goes, the same hardship becomes much more dangerous. That is why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much in this source. The reopening of commercial passage was not just a technical move. It was not just a shipping decision. It was the psychological surrender of the last pressure card the regime could still point to and say, see, we still have leverage. We still make the world react. We still have something that forces Washington to care. Then the card was given back. No visible strategic gain. No clear reciprocal concession. No triumphant speech explaining why the retreat was secretly a win. No embodied center strong enough to convert concession into discipline, just a post, and then rage. That is the moment the story broke, because Hormuz was not just a strait in the regime's self-image. It was the last clean symbol that endurance still produced leverage. As long as Iran could still tighten the global energy system, it could still tell the people who had suffered through sanctions and economic punishment that the suffering was buying power. The moment that card was reopened without an obvious return, millions of people inside the system were forced into the same awful thought at once. What exactly did all of this buy us? That is when the crisis stopped being only external and became internal at every level. The first internal war is between the civilian shell and the military state beneath it. This has been developing for years, but the source makes clear that it has now reached the point where it is no longer really deniable. Pezeshkian may be president, but he is not the center of command. He cannot meaningfully govern without the guard's approval. He can be contradicted publicly by commanders. He can carry the title without carrying the line. That is not ordinary tension inside an authoritarian system. That is the elected FIA being eaten by the coercive core while both still pretend to be part of the same state. The source goes further than that. It says real power has drifted toward a three-man security committee, Vahidi Zolgadar, Mohsen Rezai, none of them elected, none of them clerical, all of them men of war security and confrontation that matters because it tells you that Iran is no longer being ruled primarily through the constitutional language it still uses to describe itself. It is being ruled through emergency military logic by a group that was never built to compromise and no longer seems willing to pretend otherwise. That is not just a personnel story. It is a regime-type story. The Republic still has ministries, speeches, signatures, titles, but the center of gravity has moved beneath the surface. The second internal war is between the Guard and the clergy. This one is even more consequential because it strikes the regime's founding theology. The Islamic Republic was not supposed to be just another dictatorship with religious wallpaper. It claimed that clerical authority itself was the source of rule, the supreme jurist, the fusion of sovereignty and theological legitimacy. The mullahs did not merely bless the state. They were supposed to embody the logic of the state. Now the clergy is watching a military security committee govern in its name. That is why the source correctly treats this as a profound rupture. If the country can continue, however shakily, under men of the guard while the clerics are sidelined, then the hardest question becomes impossible to suppress. Was the Islamic element ever truly the operating core? Or was it always the wrapping around a revolutionary security state that has now decided it can function more openly as itself? That question is devastating, because once it becomes thinkable inside the elite, decades of repression justified in the name of sacred authority begin to look like coercion without transcendence. The third internal war is in society. This is where the story becomes truly combustible. The people in the streets are not just the old secular opposition, not just the usual urban anti-regime circles, not just detached critics. Many of them are people who once gave the regime its depth. Families that endured war, communities that swallowed sanctions, supporters who accepted hardship because they believed the system's central promise that sacrifice had meaning. Now the economy is collapsing under them. Power cuts in Tehran stretch for hours. Fuel lines extend across neighborhoods. Food prices keep climbing. Medicine is missing. Cancer treatments are suspended. Small businesses are closing. ATMs are running dry. The resistance economy has been exposed not as a genuine alternative model, but as a slogan financed by tax increases and inflationary extraction from ordinary people. That is why the unrest is different. It is not just material, it is moral. People can survive poverty for a long time if they think the poverty is buying something larger than comfort. But if the state can neither deliver prosperity nor preserve dignity, then the pain loses its story. And once pain loses its story, the anger becomes much more dangerous. That is why the Shah chants matter so much in this source. They are not just opposition theater. They are an inversion of the Republic's founding myth. The regime exists because the monarchy was overthrown. If 47 years later people are openly invoking the return of what the revolution buried, then the regime is not merely losing support. It is watching the historical arrow of its own legitimacy reverse in public. That is an existential insult to a revolutionary state. And now all of this is happening under an invisible leader that is the fourth and most dangerous layer for 35 days. According to the source, Mojtaba Khamenei did not appear as a real embodied sovereign, no image, no commanding speech, no visible exercise of authority. During the worst transition crisis the regime has faced in decades, reports say he may have been injured, but politically the exact medical detail almost does not matter. What matters is the effect the top of the system went dark at the precise moment every lower layer needed a visible center. This is the kind of thing authoritarian systems handle very badly. They can survive unpopular rulers, they can survive ugly crackdowns, they can survive economic pain, they can survive international pressure. What they struggle to survive is visible vacancy at the apex, when every faction below is already unstable, because a dark throne changes how everyone beneath it behaves. The president stops looking like a subordinate of sovereign authority and starts looking like a trapped official under military management. The clerics stop looking like custodians of sacred rule and start looking like men watching their own system be repurposed without them. The public stops seeing discipline continuity and starts seeing absence. And the guard itself starts to ask the most dangerous question any Praetorian institution can ask: is the man we are supposed to defend now part of the problem? That is why the reported IRGC whisper campaign is so explosive. The organization that exists to guard the supreme leader is now, according to the source, quietly circulating the idea that he should go once that thought becomes normal. Inside the coercive core, the regime has crossed into a different category of danger. It is no longer just suppressing unrest. It is managing internal recalculation at the level of succession. And there's one more ingredient making all of this worse. Paranoia. The source describes targeted operations in late March that punctured the guard's sense of invulnerability. Men in supposed safe zones were found, internal security figures were reached. Communications tightened, distrust spread, questions of infiltration and leaks began poisoning internal channels. That matters because hard states do not usually break first because the street is loud. They break when the men enforcing order begin to distrust the chain above them and the channels among them. That is when the repressive machine starts hollowing out, not publicly, quietly. The commander who says less than he used to, the officer who stops trusting the channel, the cleric who no longer believes the theology still rules the state, the loyal supporter who still attends the rally but no longer believes the slogan. The institution that still looks hard from the outside but has begun entirely to calculate survival instead of obedience is how systems move into freefall before the outside world fully sees it. So what is this story actually about? Not just protests, not just a missing leader, not just the guard, not just the economy. It is about simultaneous narrative collapse. The guard no longer fully trusts the apex. The clergy no longer fully owns the state. The public no longer fully believes the pain. The presidency no longer fully governs anything. And the one story that held all of that together, we suffer. But we do not bow, no longer sounds true even to the people who are supposed to repeat it. That is why this moment feels so dangerous, because a regime can survive enemies, it can survive sanctions, it can survive humiliation, it can survive loss. What it struggles to survive is the moment when the men who suppress, the clerics who justify, and the people who endure all begin to doubt the same central story at once. That is the threshold Iran now seems to be approaching. And once a regime reaches that threshold, the outer shell can remain standing for a while, flags still wave, television still broadcasts, courts still function, arrests still happen, speeches are still read, the shell remains. But the thing that gave the shell meaning has started to leave: belief. And once belief begins withdrawing from a revolutionary state's own guardians, the question is no longer whether the crisis is real. The question is whether there is still enough faith left at the top to stop the men with power from preparing for what comes after it. That is why I would end here. The Islamic Republic may not fall because the street got louder. It may fall because the men who were built to save it no longer believe the man at the top can save it at all.